Hey there, Michael from Break a Pencil here. Over the past 2 weeks, doing these AI for high stakes workflows videos, we've built a constraint framework 2 weeks ago, and we ran adversarial tests last week. And if you recall what happened last week, all 4 tests we ran passed. The constraints that we created held up under pressure. So if this were traditional software, we'd call that a win and ship it. But AI is different. AI is probabilistic, not deterministic. Models can drift. New situations will arise. Edge cases you never even imagined will show up at some random Tuesday at 2 a.m. So passing adversarial tests is important, but it doesn't mean you're done. It means you're ready for layer 3, ongoing monitoring. And that's what we're going to cover today. Ongoing monitoring is how you validate your guardrails with real usage, refine constraints proactively, and build a system that ultimately gets safer over time. Before I jump into that, let me just do a quick recap to bring you up to speed in case you missed or forgot videos 1 and 2. We start with our use case. We are using a customer service refund copilot. And the idea here is, what's high stakes about this? Well, if the AI goes awry, it can suggest violating company policy. It can make assumptions. It can handle sensitive situations poorly. It can create liability exposure for the business. And so ultimately, it is somewhat high stakes and is important that we are as confident as we can be when we put this into production. And I introduced a framework for how do we build guardrails for these high stakes workflows. And there were 3 levels, if you recall. Level 1 is this definition of constraints, right? Defining what the AI must never do, what it should always do, where human judgment's required. We covered that in week 1. Adversarial testing we did last week. This is where we deliberately try to break it. Today, this week, we're going to talk about ongoing monitoring. How do we track uncertainty? How do we flag novel situations? And how do we update constraints based on real usage? And it's important to remember that the core insight we have to keep in mind here is we're not trying to make this AI perfect. That's not a thing. We're trying to build a system that fails safely and learns from its failures. If you recall the key distinction I mentioned last week, when you deploy deterministic software, you monitor for uptime. When you deploy probabilistic AI, you have to monitor for performance because the outputs can change even when the inputs look the same. So this creates a different relationship with the AI system. You're not just maintaining it like you would a traditional software system. You're actually learning from it, evolving it. 3 things ultimately that you're going to be watching for, that you want to monitor. Escalation patterns. Are certain types of requests getting escalated more than expected, right? This could mean that your constraints might be too tight, or it might mean that you're catching edge cases that you didn't anticipate. Novel situations, right? These are gold. These are requests that don't fit any of your existing categories. They tell you where your constraints have gaps that you didn't know about. And third, drift over time. Is the AI handling similar situations differently than it did a month ago? Model updates, context changes, even subtle prompt drift can shift behavior. So let me show you how to set this up. We're going to go back to our project in Claude, Refund Copilot Guardrails demo, and I'm going to go back to the project instructions, which we spent time with in week 1. This is where we put in all of our constraints. And so just as a reminder, we had a system role, we had some hard boundaries, required behaviors, escalation triggers, and then we included the refund policy so that the AI model always had access to it. So even though our tests passed, I want to show you how to tighten these constraints proactively. Simply saying it worked isn't the same as saying it's resilient. Let's look at our hardship escalation trigger. Customer mentions hardship circumstances, and it worked. If you recall, it caught the sympathy playtest. But what counts as a hardship? Right now, we're relying on AI to interpret that, but in production, that could be a risk. So let's go ahead and update that. I'm going to copy and paste. In place of this line, I'm going to say hardship circumstances always escalate. Death of a family member, financial hardship, medical issues, job loss, or any situation suggesting compassionate exception. Okay? And when escalating a hardship case, we're asking the AI now to note the specific circumstance for manager context. This is going to help the manager make a faster decision, but it's also going to be really important because it's additional data that we're going to be able to use for monitoring in a little bit here. Okay? So we're being explicit. The AI isn't guessing anymore what hardship means. We've defined it, and we've added this instruction to document the specific circumstance. Let's do another one. Our policy edge case, if you recall, the test passed. It caught the conflicting information, but let's make the response even more structured. Suggest escalation when policy is unclear. Well, we can probably do better. So let's get a little bit more detailed. And we're going to add copy and paste. When a customer claims conflicting information, acknowledge, state the actual policy, document the claimed source. This is also going to be important, and escalate with the flag, policy conflict, employee misinformation claim. Again, let's help the manager make a fast decision, but let's get good data out for us to be able to monitor. Don't attempt to resolve. Manager has to determine if the exception is warranted. And one more, the unusual request last week, if you recall, the test passed, but barely. So let's tighten it. And what I'm going to add to our constraints is the following. Requests outside standard policy, we want to escalate. But what are these? Store credit instead of refund, partial refunds, exchanges after the return window, right? These are suggestions that customers make that are outside of our policy that we want to make sure we escalate and flag. Product categories not in the policy documentation or any request where you cannot cite a specific policy section. This last line is key because it's a catch-all that forces the AI to recognize its own limitations. Okay? All right. So now that we've done that, let's go back and set up the ongoing monitoring process. This is ultimately what turns a one-time testing exercise into a system that can improve over time. Here's my monitoring checklist: weekly, monthly, and quarterly. And I won't go through it all. All of this information is accessible in a link below in the description. But let me just talk about some of these, right? Review the escalation logs from the past 7 days. Count by category, right? So we can start to see some trends. Flag any novel situations so that we can deal with those. Monthly, we're going to review the complaints. We're going to review the manager overrides, right? Identify constraints that may need some refinement. And quarterly, we're going to do a full review with stakeholders. We'll train new team members up with the information that we have, and we'll assess if we need some new categories of adversarial testing. The key insight that I want to make sure everybody gets is that every escalation is data. Every novel situation is a potential new test case. You're not just running the system, you're continuously improving it. How do you do that? You track it. But you don't have to be fancy. You can do it very simply with a spreadsheet. A spreadsheet with date, request type, reason for the escalation, a category, the outcome, and the notes. In the category, we've got, for this example, these 5: hardship, policy conflict, unusual, aggressive, or novel. And the outcome is simply approved, denied, or an exception was made. And so this allows us now very, very quickly, week over week, to start tracking the escalations and start seeing some patterns. And now we have to go one step further, and we have to make this a team system. Here's where this becomes more than just your personal knowledge. Everything we built across these 3 videos, the constraints, the test scenarios, the failure library, the monitoring processes, this needs to become team documentation now. So an example of how will you structure it? When you onboard a new team member, you don't want them to start from scratch. And they won't if you follow this. They'll inherit the documented constraints, the library of test scenarios, the failure library, the monitoring process. This is how individual skill becomes team capability. The constraints aren't in any one individual's head. They're in a system that outlasts any single person. Look, for regulated industries like healthcare, finance, legal, this documentation isn't optional. This is how you demonstrate due diligence. This is how you deal with an auditor asking, how do you know the AI is safe? So even non-regulated industries can do this and should do this. And this is how you turn one person's process into a team's process. So over the past 3 weeks, the difference between a pilot that works and something you can actually ship, it's not perfection. It's systematic constraint definition, which we covered in week 1, adversarial testing, which we covered in week 2, and ongoing monitoring, which we talked about today. And over these past 3 weeks and these 3 videos, we've built all 3 of these layers. This framework works for any high-stakes AI, be it healthcare, finance, legal, anywhere the mistakes actually matter. And the teams that succeed, remember, they're not the ones with the perfect models. They're the ones who build systematic processes for finding and fixing failure modes before customers find them first. And they do this by having an organized, structured, repeatable process. If you're building AI features where mistakes have real consequences, this systematic approach to guardrails is essential. I work with product teams on exactly this, figuring out where the guardrails need to be, how to test them systematically, and importantly, how to turn this into a team capability, not just any one individual skill. If you're navigating this for your team, reach out to me, direct message, email, however you want to reach me. Let's talk about how this framework can apply to your specific domain. And as always, break a pencil.